He built skyscrapers across Chicago, but nothing prepared him for the moment a little girl handed him a box of cookies and a creased photo of himself from a past he'd buried. Michael Adams, a reclusive billionaire developer, is stopped in his tracks on a cold day on Michigan Avenue when 6-year-old Emma says she's raising money for her sick grandmother. One question shatters his world. "Who's your dad?" Her answer, a photo of him. As secrets unravel and painful memories resurface, Michael must confront the woman he once pushed away and the daughter he never knew existed. But someone in his circle will do anything to keep his past buried, even if it means putting Emma in danger. Can a man who once chose power over love find redemption in fatherhood? Subscribe now and don't miss the most emotional story we've ever told. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through the canyon of glass and steel along Michigan Avenue, but Michael Adams barely noticed. His tailored overcoat shielded him from the cold, but not from the gnawing emptiness that had settled in his chest over the years. A self-made billionaire, Michael had built his empire brick by brick, yet found himself increasingly isolated atop his towering achievements. Wikipedia +1. Wikipedia +1. As he approached his favorite bookstore, a small voice halted him. "Cookies for sale, sir?" Michael turned to see a young girl, no older than 6, bundled in a puffy pink coat, her cheeks rosy from the cold. Her eyes sparkled with determination as she held out a box of cookies. "They're for my grandma," she added earnestly. Michael hesitated, the girl's earnestness tugging at something deep within him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp bill. "I'll take a box," he said, offering the money. The girl beamed, handing him a box of cookies. As he accepted it, he asked, "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied. ABC7, Chicago. Phi, Idea, Public Schools. 5 Indy with kids. Indy with kids +5. "Emma," he repeated, the name unfamiliar yet oddly resonant. "And your grandma, is she okay?" Emma's expression grew somber. "She's sick. I'm helping raise money for her medicine." Michael nodded, touched by the girl's sense of responsibility. "That's very kind of you." He glanced at the box of cookies, then back at Emma. "Do you have a dad helping you with this?" Emma's eyes lit up as she reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a worn, creased photograph. She held it up for him to see. Michael's heart stopped. The photo was of him, taken over a decade ago. "My mom said this is my dad," Emma said softly. Michael stared at the photo, his mind racing. He remembered the woman who had taken it, Rachel Bennett. They had shared a brief but intense relationship, one he had ended abruptly during a particularly ruthless phase of his career. "Your mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's her name?" "Wikipedia." "Rachel," Emma replied. Homepage. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. He looked at Emma, seeing traces of Rachel in her features, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. "And your grandma's name?" he asked, struggling to maintain composure. "Linda Bennett," Emma said. Michael nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. He reached into his wallet, pulling out a business card. "If you ever need anything, have your grandma call me," he said, handing it to Emma. Emma took the card, her small fingers brushing against his. "Thank you, mister." Michael watched as she turned and walked away, her figure slowly disappearing into the crowd. He stood there, the box of cookies in one hand, the photograph in the other, his world irrevocably changed. As he entered the bookstore, the warmth inside did little to thaw the chill that had settled in his bones. He knew that his past had just caught up with him, and nothing would ever be the same again. Michael stood frozen in the corner of the bookstore cafe. The photo Emma had shown him now burned into his memory. The hum of conversations, clinking mugs, the faint notes of a jazz playlist. None of it registered. All he could hear was her voice. "My mom said this is my dad." His photo. He hadn't seen Rachel in years. He'd buried that part of his life, telling himself it was better for both of them. But Emma's face, her eyes, her stubborn confidence, it was like looking into a mirror of a life he never knew he'd started. Slipping out of the bookstore, Michael ducked into the back seat of his black SUV. His driver, Kevin, started to ask if everything was all right. One look at Michael's face shut him up. "Find out everything you can about Rachel Bennett," Michael said hoarsely, tugging off his gloves. "Where she lived, who she lived with, if she's still alive." Kevin nodded, stunned by the rare crack in Michael's normally composed tone. By the next morning, Michael had his answer. Rachel had died 2 months ago. Leukemia. Quietly. No public funeral, no headlines. Her obituary, printed in the Oak Park Gazette, mentioned one surviving family member, her mother, Linda Bennett. Michael stared at the screen, jaw clenched, unable to process the truth. He hadn't even known she was sick. He hadn't known she was pregnant. And now she was gone. He should have called, written, something. Instead, he'd buried himself in deals, in luxury condos and real estate summits, pretending there had never been a Rachel. But Rachel had existed, and so did Emma. Later that day, he stood outside a modest 2-story home in Oak Park. It wasn't flashy, but the yard was clean, the porch carefully swept. A wreath hung on the door, slightly tilted. It was a home full of effort, not money. He rang the bell. The door creaked open, and a woman in her 60s peered out. Short gray hair, a knit cardigan over a faded sweatshirt. Her eyes were cautious, tired, but sharp. "You must be Linda," he said gently. "I'm Michael Adams." Her expression didn't change. "Took you long enough?" Michael blinked. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "She wrote to you. For years. Letters came back unopened. Phone numbers changed. Emails bounced." Michael's chest tightened. "I never got anything. I didn't know. I didn't even know she was sick." Linda studied him for a long moment. "Convenient." He took a deep breath. "I'm not here to excuse what I didn't do. I met Emma yesterday. She showed me a photo. My photo." Something softened in Linda's eyes just barely. She found that in Rachel's old journal. Told her the man in the picture was her dad. Michael looked down. "Is she mine?" "She is," Linda said firmly. "Rachel was never with anyone else after you. Said it hurt too much to try again." A silence stretched between them. Michael swallowed hard. "I'd like to be part of her life, if you'll let me." Linda's gaze stayed on him, searching for something buried under his polished exterior. After a long pause, she said quietly, "Emma's already lost her mother. She doesn't need more heartbreak." "I won't disappear," he said. "You say that now, but she's a child, not a project." Michael flinched. Linda folded her arms. "You can see her, but no big gestures, no promises yet. If you're serious, you'll prove it." Michael nodded, humbled. "Thank you." As he walked back to his car, the photo of Emma clutched in his hand, Michael knew the hardest part was still ahead. Becoming a father to a little girl who didn't even know him, and earning her trust without breaking her heart. The following morning, Michael sat alone in his penthouse study, a silent fortress of glass and steel overlooking the frozen Chicago skyline. He stared at a manila envelope on his desk like it might detonate. Inside were the DNA test results. Final. Conclusive. He hadn't slept. Not really. Between replaying Emma's voice and Rachel's face in his memory, he was haunted by what-ifs and might-have-beens. A decade of silence had created a child, and cost him a chance at love. He didn't know whether to feel lucky or guilty, or both. With steady hands, he opened the envelope. Paternity confirmed with 99.997% probability. Michael exhaled shakily. He blinked hard against a swell of emotion. It was real. Emma was his daughter. He picked up his phone and called Linda. "I got the results," he said quietly. "I figured," she replied. Her voice was guarded, but less icy. "She's yours." "I want to see her again," he said earnestly. "Maybe take her somewhere for an afternoon. She's used to disappointment, Michael. Don't promise anything you can't keep." "I'm not making promises," he said. "I'm asking for a chance." There was a pause, then a sigh. "All right. Tomorrow. Take her to the Field Museum. She loves dinosaurs." Dinosaurs, he thought, that he could handle. Saturday morning was gray and bitterly cold, but Emma's energy cut through it like sunlight. She wore a red puffer coat, 2 mismatched gloves, and a backpack with a Stegosaurus keychain swinging from the zipper. Michael bent down, unsure how to start. "Hi, Emma." "Hi, Mr. Adams," she said politely. "You ready to see some fossils?" She grinned. "Yeah, but they're not just fossils. They're records of prehistoric life," Michael chuckled. "Of course." Inside the museum, she darted from one exhibit to another with curious delight. Michael followed, answering questions when he could and Googling when he couldn't. She peppered him with facts. Did you know Sue the T-Rex had 58 teeth? Did you know some dinosaurs had feathers? At the mummified reptiles exhibit, she held his hand without thinking. He didn't let go. Later, over hot cocoa at the cafe, she stirred her drink seriously. "Do you know my mom?" Michael's heart paused mid-beat. "I did, a long time ago. She said you were really busy, too busy to stay." He winced. "That's partly true, and partly my fault." Emma nodded solemnly. "She said you used to like black coffee with no sugar. I tried it once, it's gross." Michael laughed, touched by the odd little connection. "Yeah, it kind of is." Emma leaned forward. "Do you have kids?" "Just one," he said softly. "You." Her eyes widened, then dropped to her cocoa. "Oh." She said nothing else for a long moment, but when they left the cafe, she slipped her hand into his again. That night, back in Oak Park, Linda watched from the porch as Emma dashed up the steps, flushed with stories and excitement. "He knew everything about fossils," Emma said breathlessly, "and he didn't even fall asleep once." Linda looked up at Michael. She had a good time. "I did too," he said quietly. "You're lucky, Michael. She doesn't open up like that to just anyone. I'm not taking it for granted." Linda nodded slowly, then handed him a box from the entryway. "What's this?" "Rachel's letters," she said. "Some she mailed. Most she didn't. I thought you should have them." Michael clutched the box like something sacred. "Thank you." "She never stopped loving you," Linda added, "even after she stopped expecting you to come back." Michael swallowed hard. "I didn't know what I had. She knew. That's why she kept writing." As Michael drove back into the city, the letters on the passenger seat, he realized he was carrying more than paper. He was carrying a second chance and the weight of a woman's unwavering love. That night, in his silent penthouse, he opened the first envelope. Rachel's handwriting greeted him like a voice from a life paused too long. "If you ever meet her, please don't see her as a mistake. Just love her the way I did." And, for the first time in years, Michael Adams cried. Michael hadn't expected his life to feel this full, not so quickly. Yet there he was, 3 weekends deep into museum trips, library visits, and sidewalk chalk masterpieces with Emma Bennett, his daughter, his daughter. The word still echoed strangely in his mind, like a melody he didn't realize he'd been humming all his life. At first, Emma called him Mr. Adams, stiff, formal, distant. But somewhere between dinosaur trivia and her obsession with puzzles, the wall had started to crack. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, they sat across from each other in the reading room of the Harold Washington Library. Emma was deep into a book on space, her lips moving silently as she read. Michael leaned forward, voice gentle. "You like space?" "I want to be an astronaut," she said firmly. "Why?" She looked up. "Because I want to see everything from up there, all at once. It makes everything make more sense." He smiled at the simplicity, at the wisdom. It really does. They were quiet again for a while. Then came the moment. Soft, unscripted. "Dad," she said, not realizing, "can I keep the book if I promise to finish it this week?" Michael blinked, unsure if he'd heard right, but he didn't correct her. He just nodded slowly and said, "Of course, sweetheart." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. Instead, he paced the halls of his lakeshore penthouse, glass walls reflecting a city that never rested. The same city he'd once conquered with cold ambition now felt different. Smaller, emptier, without her voice in it. He walked into the spare bedroom. It had always been there, meant for guests who never stayed long. But now, he saw it with new eyes. Within days, the space was transformed. A white and silver telescope stood by the window. Glow-in-the-dark stars speckled the ceiling. Bookshelves bloomed with titles about planets, dinosaurs, and mysteries. In the center, a twin bed with a navy comforter and a moon-shaped nightlight. And, waiting on the pillow, a plush triceratops. It wasn't an apology. It was a beginning. Christmas Eve came with frost-laced windows and a rare stillness over the city. Michael picked Emma up from Oak Park just after sunset. "You said I could spend the night?" she asked cautiously. He smiled. "Only if you're okay with cookies and cocoa for dinner," she giggled. "I'm okay with that." When they arrived, Michael opened the door slowly, revealing the room. Emma stepped inside, speechless. She looked around, eyes wide, heart racing. "For me? For you?" She ran to the bed, tracing her fingers over the star-shaped lamp. "You remembered my favorite planet. Saturn, right?" She nodded. "It has rings, like a queen." He sat on the edge of the bed. "You are one, Emma." There was a long pause before she spoke again, voice trembling slightly. "Does this mean I can come back?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Any time you want." Outside the room, Linda Bennett watched quietly. She'd come along just to make sure, but had said little since arriving. Now, she folded her arms, blinking away a tear. "You're really trying," she said later in the kitchen. "I should have tried a long time ago." Linda studied him for a beat. "She's had a lot of loss, Michael. You break her heart." "I won't," he interrupted softly. "I promise." She nodded, not quite smiling. "Then maybe we can try something too." Later that night, after Emma had drifted off, Michael stepped into his office. The hallway was dark, quiet, until he noticed something new. Taped to the glass of his office door, in glitter glue and crooked letters, was a sign that read, "Do not enter. Dino Lab in progress." Signed, The Little Boss. Michael touched it gently. A laugh caught in his throat. For the first time, this place felt like home. Gregory Adams had built his life on proximity to power. As Michael's cousin and CFO of Adams Holdings, he'd benefited quietly for years, his name always near the top but never carrying the weight of the legacy itself. And, for the longest time, that was enough. Until Emma. She came into the picture like a whisper, and now, in Gregory's eyes, loomed like a storm cloud. He noticed the subtle shifts. Michael skipped a major real estate summit in New York, for family reasons. The quarterly strategy review, rescheduled around Emma's museum field trip, and the biggest red flag? Michael began updating his will. Gregory sat in his glass-walled office, staring at the draft estate documents his assistant had discreetly forwarded. Emma's name was now listed beside Michael's, his daughter, his heir. He clenched his jaw. The girl was 6. She didn't belong in boardrooms or trusts. She didn't even carry the last name Adams. That night, over bourbon and bad intentions, Gregory called someone from a number he hadn't used in years. "I need information," he muttered, "and a little disruption. Discreetly." Meanwhile, Michael and Emma were exploring another frontier, each other. It was Saturday morning. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and too sweet cocoa. Emma sat cross-legged at the marble island, quizzing Michael with flashcards. "What's 9 times 6? She challenged, narrowing her eyes playfully. Michael raised an eyebrow. "You're testing a billionaire on multiplication?" She giggled. "Money doesn't mean you're smart." He laughed heartily, dropping his head in mock defeat. 54. Final answer." She nodded, impressed. "You're getting better." That was the rhythm now. Weekends filled with warmth. Joy stitched together through the ordinary. Mornings in pajamas, arguments over the best dinosaur, whispered bedtime stories that made Emma feel safe. But Michael wasn't naive. Not anymore. When Linda showed up with concern in her eyes and worry in her voice, he listened. "Someone's been watching the house," she said quietly over coffee. Michael straightened. "What do you mean?" "Same black SUV, twice this week, and Emma said a man asked her what her last name was outside the bookstore yesterday." Michael's expression hardened. "That's not random." He moved fast. Within the hour, his security chief, Nolan Reyes, had dispatched surveillance and put private protection on Emma and Linda. Quiet, but firm. "I don't want her to know," Michael said urgently. "Let her feel normal for once." Nolan nodded. "We'll keep it invisible." Michael knew the stakes were rising, and he had a sinking feeling who was behind it. The next Monday, Gregory cornered Michael in the elevator, trying for casual but failing miserably. "Family's complicated, huh?" he said, sipping overpriced coffee. "One day, you're making legacy plans. The next, boom, surprise daughter." Michael gave him a cold glance. "You have something to say. Say it." Gregory smiled thinly. "Just don't forget who's been by your side for 20 years. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes it's the opposite." Michael stepped off the elevator. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing." That night, Michael stood on the penthouse balcony looking out over Chicago. Below, the city shimmered in orange and gold, but inside, the shadows were growing. He turned to the living room where Emma was asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around her triceratops, a book half open on her chest. Michael walked over, gently lifting her into his arms. As he carried her to bed, he whispered, "No one's ever taking you from me." Outside, a camera lens clicked from across the street. The holiday gala at the Adams Holdings skyscraper was dazzling. Strings of lights draped across balconies, orchestras humming in the background, and servers circulating with crystal flutes of champagne. But beneath the elegance, Michael Adams couldn't relax. He kept glancing at the security feeds on his phone between handshakes with investors and stiff smiles for board members. His instincts were on edge, and ever since Linda's warning and the SUV sightings, he no longer ignored his instincts. Emma was there too, dressed in a silver satin dress with sparkly sneakers, holding a small plate of cookies and cocoa. Michael had told her she could only stay an hour. "I'm 6, not a baby," she'd protested earlier. He smiled, kissing the top of her head. "Exactly why you get an early bedtime." Gregory was also at the gala, polished, poised, and pretending nothing had changed. But Michael hadn't missed the recent audit discrepancies or the subtle pressure he'd been applying through other board members. Something was unraveling behind Gregory's smug expression, and Michael planned to cut the thread before it snapped. 30 minutes into the event, Emma suddenly staggered near the refreshment table. Her cocoa slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor. She whimpered, clutching her stomach. Michael rushed over instantly, his world narrowing to her pale face and trembling fingers. "Emma, baby, talk to me." Her eyes fluttered. "Hurts. Daddy." Security swooped in. An ambulance was called. As paramedics worked quickly, Michael noticed the untouched cookie on her plate, but the cocoa cup was nearly empty. He turned to Nolan Reyes, his head of security. "I want the drink tested, now, and pull every second of footage near that table." Nolan nodded grimly and disappeared. At the hospital, Michael sat beside Emma's bed holding her tiny hand, rage simmering beneath the surface of his grief. Doctors assured him she'd recover. It had been an allergic reaction to hazelnut extract, something Emma's medical records clearly listed as dangerous. She could have died. Linda arrived minutes later and immediately went to Emma's side, tears in her eyes. Michael quietly stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. "Nolan? We've got the footage," his security chief replied. "You're going to want to see it." The video was clear. Gregory standing near the refreshment table, a quiet moment when no one watched. He held Emma's cup, dipped something in, stirred, smiled. Michael felt cold all over. "Get the police," he ordered. "Now." The next morning, the boardroom was packed, not for a meeting, but for a reckoning. Michael stood at the head of the table, stone-faced. Gregory sat opposite him, calm but fidgeting, not yet aware of the storm about to break. "I have security footage," Michael said quietly, "of a cup being tampered with. That cup was handed to my daughter, and she nearly died." Gasps echoed. Michael tapped his phone. The screen behind him came alive. The room watched in silence as Gregory's betrayal played out in high definition. Gregory stood, voice rising. "You can't prove. This is a setup." Michael didn't flinch. "The extract's chemical signature matches a vial found in your apartment. Police confirmed it this morning." 2 detectives stepped into the room. "You're under arrest," one of them said, placing handcuffs on Gregory as he struggled and shouted. Michael didn't move, didn't blink. "I trusted you," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone. That night, back at the hospital, Michael curled into the chair beside Emma's bed again. She was asleep, her breathing steady. Linda handed him a folded piece of paper, Rachel's handwriting. It read, "If anything ever happens to me and you find your way to her, just protect her. She's strong, but she'll still need you." Michael clutched the letter, eyes full of tears he didn't wipe away. He leaned down and whispered, "I failed once. I won't fail again." Outside, snow began to fall over Chicago, quiet and soft, but inside, Michael's resolve had never been sharper. A week after the hospital scare, Emma was back home in Oak Park, bundled under a thick quilt with a dinosaur plush tucked under her arm. She was recovering steadily, her resilience astonishing. Michael visited every day, sometimes with books, sometimes just with his presence. But today, Linda had something else to give him, something she'd hesitated to share until now. They sat at her dining table, the kettle whistling low in the background. Linda reached into a drawer and pulled out a weathered shoebox, the edges soft from time and use. She set it down in front of him gently, like a fragile truth long hidden. "She wrote them all to you," Linda said quietly. "Some were sent, most weren't. I thought you should see who she was when she thought no one was watching." Michael opened the lid and stared at the stack of envelopes, dozens of them, some sealed, most already opened. His name was on every one. He swallowed hard. "Why didn't I get them?" he asked, voice rough with disbelief. Linda looked at him, her gaze both sad and sharp. You had people around you who didn't want distractions. I wouldn't be surprised if someone close made sure you never saw them. Michael nodded slowly, the weight of those missed years pressing down on his chest. He pulled out the first letter and began to read. Dear Michael, you probably won't read this. Maybe it won't reach you, but I needed to try. He read through the afternoon, letter after letter. Rachel's voice was still alive in her words, brave, aching, filled with the quiet strength of a woman who chose to raise a child alone, rather than beg for space in a life that had once shut her out. In one letter, Rachel wrote about Emma's birth, how she'd stared into her daughter's eyes and thought, "You have his fire." Another spoke of bedtime stories, of Emma asking if her daddy was a superhero. And then there was one Michael clutched in his trembling hands. If you ever meet her, please don't see her as a mistake. Just love her the way I did. He didn't cry at first. He tried to keep it in, tried to stay composed like he always had. But by the 5th letter, his shoulders were shaking. By the 7th, tears streaked down his face freely. Linda said nothing. She brought him tea and let him read. That night, Michael sat in his car for over an hour outside the penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. The city lights glittered, reflecting off the lake like 1,000 unanswered questions. But for once, he didn't feel alone in that silence. The next morning, he returned to Oak Park with something unexpected. Emma, he said gently as she played with her telescope, I want to show you something. He unzipped a leather case and pulled out blueprints. What if I made a room for you in my home? Not just a room, your own universe. Books, stars, maybe even a space for your dinosaurs. Emma blinked, stunned. You mean, like a real room? Not a hotel one? Michael smiled. A real one, with your name on the door. She jumped up and wrapped her arms around his waist, small and strong. Can I still have Coco? He laughed, the sound breaking through his chest like sunlight. Only if I make it myself. And later that night, when Emma drew a picture of the stars and taped it to his briefcase, she wrote in the corner in clumsy, hopeful handwriting, For Dad. Michael stared at it for a long time, his thumb gently tracing the letters. For Dad. The title he never knew he needed until now. The first snow of the season had blanketed Chicago in soft, white silence. On Lakeshore Drive, Christmas lights flickered in high-rise windows, a mosaic of warmth against the cold steel skyline. Inside Michael's penthouse, the atmosphere was tense with quiet anticipation. He paced, his heart thudding louder than the classical carols playing in the background. His staff had followed every instruction, down to the smallest detail. The bookshelf shaped like a rocket ship, glow-in-the-dark constellations pasted on the ceiling, and a plush armchair for bedtime stories. But what if she didn't like it? What if she still felt like a guest? Then the elevator chimed. Michael turned just in time to see Emma step out, hand in hand with Linda, her boots dusted with snow. Her wide eyes scanned the penthouse, lingering on the garland-draped banister and twinkling lights until they landed on him. You ready? Michael asked softly. Emma nodded shyly. You said it's a surprise. He smiled and led her down the hall. Close your eyes. She giggled, squeezing them shut. Michael opened the door to the room, his throat tightening. Okay, open. Emma's eyes flew open, and her jaw dropped. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with stories of dragons, scientists, and faraway galaxies. A telescope stood by the window, perfectly positioned toward the stars. The ceiling sparkled with carefully placed stickers that mimicked the night sky, and on the wall hung a framed print. Dream big, little one. She walked in slowly, touching everything. Is this for me? Michael knelt beside her, his voice husky. It's your room, Emma. For when you visit, or when you need a place to just B. Emma's face lit up like fireworks. It's better than my dreams. She ran to the telescope, then spun in place and tackled him with a hug. Thank you, Mr. Adams. He wrapped his arms around her, but before he could respond, she added in a whisper, thank you, Dad. Michael's breath caught. He didn't move, afraid that the moment would vanish if he did. I've been wanting to call you that, she continued, nervously twisting her fingers. But I wasn't sure if I could. He pulled back, looking her in the eyes, his own shining. You never have to ask for that. I'm honored to be your dad. Down the hall, Linda watched quietly, her eyes misty. This wasn't the cold tycoon who once lived behind tinted windows and bodyguards. This was a man who had crumbled and rebuilt himself, piece by fragile piece, for a little girl who wore star-shaped barrettes and asked questions about black holes. Later, over cocoa and gingerbread cookies made with Emma's very specific no nutmeg rule, they decorated the tree. Emma hung a hand-drawn ornament shaped like a dinosaur with glasses. This is you, she said, placing it at the very top. Michael laughed so hard he nearly dropped the cocoa. Why does he have glasses? Because you're smart. And a little weird, she said with a grin. But good weird. They fell asleep in the reading nook, wrapped in a fleece blanket, the snow still falling outside. Before Emma drifted off, she whispered one last thing. Mom would have liked this. Michael pressed a kiss to her forehead. I hope so. In that quiet room, filled with warmth and light, a new tradition was born, one rooted not in bloodlines or wealth, but in love rebuilt from regret, and joy rediscovered through second chances. For the first time in years, Michael Adams felt whole. Emma had begun calling him Dad without hesitation. Linda had warmed to his presence, and even the staff had grown fond of the little girl who danced barefoot through the halls and left glittery crayon art on their clipboards. But as warmth seeped into Michael's life, so did unease. It started subtly. Emma developed hives after a holiday company gathering. They assumed it was a seasonal allergy, but then it happened again, more severe this time. Her throat tightened, her skin flushed, and Linda had to jab her with an EpiPen as Michael rushed them to the ER, his heart pounding like a war drum. She's never had reactions like this before, the doctor said, concerned. Something's being introduced that shouldn't be. Michael couldn't sleep that night. He sat up by Emma's bedside at his penthouse watching her chest rise and fall beneath her star-patterned comforter. Her small hand clutched the dinosaur plush he'd given her, the same one she'd named Junior Mike. The next day, he called in his head of security, Mason Rivera. A former Secret Service agent turned private contractor, Mason had been with Michael through hostile takeovers and threats from rival developers. But this was personal. I want a full sweep of the house, Michael ordered. Check her snacks, her drinks, anything she touched that day. Mason nodded grimly. We'll find out. 3 days later, Mason returned with a flash drive. We reviewed footage from the company party. Watch this. Michael's eyes narrowed as the screen lit up. In the video, Emma was happily sipping cocoa handed to her by a staff member. Then Gregory Adams, Michael's cousin and CFO, stepped into frame. He smiled, said something to the staff member. She handed the cup back. Emma took it. 15 minutes later, she collapsed. Michael's blood ran cold. He tampered with it, Mason said, jaw tight. We had the remnants of the cocoa tested. It contained hazelnut extract. She's allergic. Michael clenched his fists. He tried to poison my daughter. Gregory, the man he once considered family. Trusted with access, with plans, with legacy. The same man who, for years, stood in line to inherit everything Michael built, until Emma changed all of that. That night, Michael called an emergency board meeting. Every executive was summoned to the glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. Gregory arrived last, confident, smug. "Mike," he said, taking a seat, "what's so urgent it couldn't wait till morning?" Michael stood slowly, his voice steady but thick with fury. "Someone tried to hurt my daughter." The room went silent. He hit play on the footage. Gasps echoed. A few board members turned pale. Gregory's smirk faded. Michael walked toward him, every step deliberate. "You used to say blood was thicker than contracts. But Emma is my blood. You tried to erase her from my life to protect your position." Gregory stood abruptly. "You have no proof. I do," Mason interrupted, stepping in. "You purchased the extract online. We traced your IP address, and the vendor confirmed the shipping label. Your assistant picked it up." Michael didn't blink. "I'm filing charges. You're fired, effective immediately." Gregory tried to lunge, rage overtaking him, but 2 security guards intercepted him before he could get close. As he was dragged out, he shouted, "She's not even worth it! She ruined everything!" Michael didn't flinch. He turned to the board. "She didn't ruin anything," he said quietly. "She gave me something no amount of money ever could. A reason." The room fell silent again, this time out of respect. Outside, the snow fell harder. Inside, Michael walked back to his office. Emma's latest drawing was taped to the door. A simple sketch of a house, a tree, and 3 stick figures labeled Me, Grandma, and Dad. He touched the paper gently and whispered, "You're safe now, I promise." For the first time in his life, Michael Adams wasn't negotiating a deal, acquiring property, or defending a corporate empire. He was sitting in a quiet courtroom in Cook County Family Court, a folder of legal documents in his lap, and a tiny pair of sneakers swinging beneath the wooden bench beside him. Emma clutched his hand tightly, her small fingers trembling slightly. "Will it hurt?" she whispered, looking up at him with eyes that mirrored his own. Michael gave her a soft smile, brushing a curl from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. It's just signing papers, nothing scary, I promise." Across the aisle, Linda Bennett sat with folded arms, watching intently but no longer hostile. Over the past few months, she had seen something shift in Michael, something real. He wasn't just playing house or doing damage control. He had fallen into fatherhood with an authenticity that even she, fiercely protective and deeply grieving, could no longer deny. The judge entered, and the courtroom hushed. The process was procedural: review of the DNA confirmation, testimony from Linda in support of the adoption, and then a moment that would forever change the life of a man once known for glass towers and ruthless deals. "Mr. Adams," the judge said, peering over her glasses, "do you understand the responsibility you are assuming by legally adopting Emma Bennett?" Michael stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "And are you prepared to be her legal guardian in every sense? Emotionally, physically, financially?" "Yes," he replied firmly. "More than prepared. I'm honored." A pause, then the slam of the gavel. "It is so ordered. Emma Bennett is now legally recognized as the daughter of Michael Adams." The moment hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't a transaction or a headline, it was a miracle. One forged not by leverage or contracts, but by love, persistence, and a second-chance life rarely offers. Outside, reporters tried to swarm the courthouse, but Michael had already made arrangements. They exited through a side door into a waiting SUV. As they drove toward their new home, a restored brownstone in Lincoln Park, Emma hummed softly, tracing little stars on the fogged-up window. "I get to keep my last name, right?" she asked, not looking at him. "You can keep it, or change it, whatever makes you feel strongest." Emma thought for a moment. "I want to be Emma Bennett Adams, like a bridge between you and Mom." Michael's throat tightened. "That's perfect." The brownstone felt different from the penthouse. Warmer, lived in, rooted. It had Rachel's favorite white rose bushes planted out front, a fireplace that actually worked, and a kitchen where Emma could bake cookies without a housekeeper hovering nervously. Michael hung a framed photo of Rachel in the foyer, just beneath Emma's latest painting of a rocket ship. "She'd want to be here," he said when Emma caught him staring at it. That night, Emma handed him an envelope at bedtime. "Wait until tomorrow to read it, okay?" she said shyly. "Promise." Michael nodded, tucking her in with care. But after she drifted off, curiosity got the better of him. He opened the letter and unfolded her careful handwriting. "Dear Mommy, I met Dad. He's not scary like I thought. He tells silly jokes and cries when he thinks I'm not looking. He misses you. I can tell. I miss you too. But I think you sent him to find me. I think you knew he'd try to be better this time. Love, Emma." Michael wiped his eyes slowly. For once, he didn't feel powerful or wealthy or important. He felt human. He felt chosen. He walked to Emma's room, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me back." Spring came late to Chicago that year, but when it did, it painted the city in a softness that Michael had never bothered to notice before. In the heart of Lincoln Park, the brownstone bloomed with life, especially in the front yard, where Michael knelt beneath the warming sun, dirt under his fingernails, planting white rose bushes. Rachel's favorite. Emma stood beside him with a watering can nearly too big for her arms. "Will they grow fast?" she asked eagerly, squinting at the soil. "Not fast," Michael said gently, patting the dirt, "but they'll grow strong, like you." Linda watched from the porch. She wasn't as guarded now. More than once she had walked into the kitchen to find Michael dancing with Emma to old jazz records, pancake batter everywhere. He was still awkward, still learning, but he was present, and for Emma, that meant everything. Inside, the walls were slowly filling up, not with expensive art or designer furniture, but with crayon masterpieces, second-hand books, and framed photographs. One, in particular, sat on the mantel, Rachel, holding baby Emma, smiling like she knew this day would come. On a sunny Saturday, Michael took Emma to Oak Ridge Memorial Cemetery. They walked hand in hand, a soft breeze nudging them forward. Emma held something in her jacket pocket, folded, wrinkled, but precious. When they reached Rachel's headstone, Emma crouched down and carefully unfolded the letter she had written. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered. "I'm okay. Grandma's okay. And Daddy found me." She paused, glancing up at Michael for reassurance. He nodded, his eyes glassy but proud. "He reads me books and makes me grilled cheese the way you used to. He still needs help with braiding, though, but I think you'd be happy. I told him he was my miracle." She tucked the letter under a small rock by the flowers. Michael knelt beside her, clearing his throat. "Rachel, I didn't deserve your faith, but I'm trying to live up to it. I hope you see us. I hope you're proud of her." They stayed there a while. No need to fill the silence. On the way home, Emma leaned against him in the back seat. "Do you miss her every day?" she asked sleepily. "Every day," Michael replied softly, "but having you makes missing her hurt a little less." Emma thought for a long time, then whispered, "Me too." Later that week, Michael surprised Emma with something unexpected. She arrived home from school to find the living room transformed. Her telescope stood by the window, pointed toward the sky. A giant constellation map stretched across one wall, and a mobile of planets spun slowly overhead. "What's all this?" she gasped. Michael knelt beside her. "Your mom used to talk about how you loved stars. I thought you might want a place to explore them." Emma threw her arms around him, fiercely and fearlessly. "Thank you, Dad." It was the first time she said it with no hesitation, no slip. just love. That night, they stared out at the stars. Michael felt something click into place. Not like closing a deal or winning a court case, but like finding a rhythm he didn't know he'd been missing. He kissed the top of her head. You know, for a long time I thought I had everything. Money, success, buildings with my name on them. And now? Emma asked. Michael smiled. Now, I know what everything really means. The night was quiet, save for the soft hum of the city lights bleeding through the curtains of Emma's new room. Michael stood at the doorway, one shoulder resting against the frame, arms folded loosely across his chest. His once pristine tailored suits had given way to rolled-up sleeves and socked feet, a quieter kind of power. Inside, Emma was asleep. Curled beneath a pale blue comforter, her arm clutched around a worn, stuffed dinosaur. Beside her, her telescope rested on its stand, aimed at the stars like it always was, as if she was waiting to catch a message from the sky. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and crayons. Her drawings, rockets, roses, and messy stick figures labeled "Me and Dad" covered the far wall. One, freshly taped up that afternoon, showed a small girl with dark hair holding hands with a man in glasses beside a tree blooming with white roses. Michael stepped in slowly. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, then sat at the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the softness of the moment. "You were never a mistake," he whispered into the quiet. His voice caught, but he kept going, the words spilling out, not for her ears now, but for his own soul. "You're my miracle." The tears came gently this time. No crashing waves, no violent shame, just peace, the kind that feels like forgiveness, not just from others, but from yourself. Downstairs, Linda brewed chamomile tea. She didn't hover anymore. She didn't need to. She had seen enough to know that Michael was no longer the man who built walls to keep people out. He was now the man who built bridges. The next morning, Michael made pancakes shaped like stars. Badly. Emma giggled through every misshapen blob, and Michael proudly declared them abstract astronomy. Later that week, he brought her to his office. Not to show off, but to let her see what used to define him. She walked through the glass halls of Adams Development, waving at assistants, asking curious questions about elevators and floor plans. When she reached his office, she saw something new above his desk, a framed copy of Rachel's letter. "If you ever meet her, please don't see her as a mistake, just love her the way I did." Emma looked up. "That's from Mommy?" Michael nodded. "She saw something in you long before I was ready to." Emma studied it for a moment, then said, "I think she sees us now." Michael swallowed, nodding. "I think so too." From that day, things shifted. Michael started a foundation in Rachel's name, focused on supporting single parents and educational resources for underprivileged kids. He called it the Bennett Light Initiative. Linda helped run it. Emma cut the ribbon at the opening in a sparkly blue dress and light-up sneakers. In time, Michael stepped away from the daily grind. No headlines, no scandals, just a quiet retreat. He wrote, traveled, told bedtime stories about a dinosaur who built cities out of stardust. Emma thrived. She grew stronger, bolder, her mother's spirit in her eyes, her father's persistence in her heart. And every year, on the anniversary of Rachel's passing, they'd return to the white rose bush outside the brownstone. Emma would bring a letter. Michael would bring silence and memory. And together, they'd leave love behind in petals and words. In the end, the legacy Michael left wasn't carved in marble or signed in gold. It was written in late-night lullabies, handwritten letters, and small hands wrapped tightly around his fingers. Because family wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. And miracles? Sometimes they look just like a little girl holding your heart in both hands.